let's talk about the election process. We've talked about how to register to vote. Now let's talk about what candidates do from the time they declare that they are running for office. Okay, they're going to do that based on the laws of their local or state government. What happens from that point until election day? Now, this video, we're primarily going to be focusing about the steps that a person would take to run for president, but know that a lot of these steps are the same steps that anybody would take if they are running for a national office. All right, first, candidates have to win their primary election or caucus. It depends on what state you live in. That will tell you whether you have a primary or caucus. In the state of North Carolina, we have primary elections, but these fulfill the same purpose. And we're going to dive deeper into each one of these steps, but first I want to go through a timeline of these steps. And we're going to talk about what is primary, what is caucus, and all that, but we'll get there. First, let's just get our timeline down. All right, so the first caucus, remember each state has either caucus or primary. Iowa has a caucus, and it is the first caucus of the 50 states. And it happens in February, okay? So think of an election year. We know a president is elected every 4 years. So starting that February, we'll have caucuses and primaries. The first primary election in the country is in New Hampshire, which is also in February. North Carolina's is in May, our primary election. So primaries and caucuses begin in February, and they run through all the 50 states till early summer. Once summer is upon us, then we start the candidates start getting ready for what's called the party conventions. Each party, the Democrats and the Republicans, each one will have their own convention, and those take place in late summer, depending on the year, so August, September timeframe. After the convention, candidates will campaign for the general election, and the general election is what we think of when we think of election day. We're talking about the general election. That's the one that happens in November, which is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November every year. So first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. If November starts on a Tuesday, November 1st Tuesday, then that will not be election day, because it has to have a Monday in November before. So if November 2nd is a Tuesday, meaning November 1st was a Monday, then November 2nd will be election day. Otherwise, it would be the following Tuesday, so that there is a Monday in November that comes before it. Okay, that's just the way it's written. And since we're mainly talking about the president in this video, please note that the general election is not when the president is actually elected. The Electoral College vote is what officially elects the president, and that happens in January, thanks to the 20th Amendment. So we have our general election in which citizens vote in November, and then the Electoral College will cast its ballots in January. Okay, also another part of the election process is campaigning, and campaigns happen way before primaries ever start, and they go all the way up through election day. So campaigns start the minute a candidate declares that they are running for office. It happens through the primary season. They keep campaigning through the conventions. They're going to keep on campaigning all the way up to election day. And then we'll have our answer as who the president is, and campaigns won't continue after that. Caucuses and primaries. Let's talk about what those are. Both of them have the same purpose. A caucus and a primary both are the state's way of narrowing down a group of people running for office to one person running for office. Okay, so you would have a list of people running for president from the Republican Party and a list of people running for office from the Democrat Party. Okay, so here is just one example. Okay, so we have Marco Rubio and Ben Carson and Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush and Donald Trump, and the list went on and on and on. All these people are running for president, but all were Republicans. Now, the Republicans are only going to want to have one person on the ticket on election day on the ballot. So they have to narrow that down to one. So they put a list of all the Republicans running for office, and they narrow it down to one. That is the purpose of a caucus and a primary. Now, the difference is a caucus is when all the people from the party get together in that state and they meet and they talk and they convince each other, no, I think it should be this guy, or I think it should be this girl, or no, I think it should be this person. And they try to convince each other until they arrive at a conclusion that it should be one person. and that's the person who wins the caucus. A primary is more like an election. That's more like what we think of. So North Carolina's primary election happening in May. What happens is we get a ballot. Okay, if you're a registered Republican, you get a Republican ballot. If you're a registered Democrat, you get a Democrat ballot. And you have a list of all the Republicans running for office, or if you're a Democrat, all the Democrats running for office, and you choose one. And at the end of the day, the Republicans look at their ballots and they find who was the one who had the most votes, and that person wins the primary. The Democrats look at their votes and they look at all the people who voted and they narrow it down. Oh, this Democrat had the most votes. That's going to be our Democrat that we run for office. Okay? So, one thing we need to talk about is the difference between an open primary and a closed primary, because each state kind of has to make their own rules here. So, North Carolina has a semi-open primary, and so what does that mean exactly? Remember back when we talked about how to register to vote? You fill out your name, your information, where you live to prove that you're a citizen and all that, and that you're in the right district. Then at the bottom it said, what political party do you want to affiliate with? So if you decide that you want to be affiliated with the Democrats, on election day, you will get a ballot for the list of Democrats. If you decided you're going to be a Republican, then on election day, you're going to have a list of Republican candidates to vote for. If you decide that you're unaffiliated, then you get to say on the primary election day, I think I'm going to vote for the Democrats, and they'll give you the Democrat. Because if you're unaffiliated, you haven't sided with the Republicans or the Democrats, but you have to choose one or the other. You cannot vote for the list of Republicans and the list of Democrats. You can't do that in North Carolina, so you have to choose one. So you just tell the person, I'm unaffiliated. They check your registration. You can have your registration card. On it, it tells you what your party affiliation is, and then that will determine which group of candidates you get to choose from. So an open primary, some states have open primaries, and that means that anyone who's registered to vote can vote in that primary. So you could be a registered Republican and vote in the Democrat primary. You could be a registered Democrat and vote in the Republican primary. In North Carolina, that is not how we have it set. A closed primary is when only registered members of the party can vote. So only the Republican-affiliated voters can vote in the Republican primary. Only the Democratic affiliated voters can vote in the Democrat primary. The only exception, which is what makes us semi, instead of open or closed, it makes us a semi-open or semi-closed state, is that if you're an unaffiliated voter, then you get to tell which one you want to vote in. You can choose to vote in the Democrat or you can choose to vote in the Republican primary, but not both. Okay. This is a side note. It's not a real great place to fit it, but I wasn't really sure where else to talk about it. You need to know what this word incumbent means. An incumbent is the person who is already in office and is running again. So in 2021, Joe Biden is president. If he were to run again for president in the next election, he would be the incumbent. So in our 2020 election, Donald Trump was the current president. He was the incumbent running against Joe Biden. Okay? Before that, we did not have an incumbent in the election because Barack Obama had already served 2 terms and he could not run again for a 3rd term, so there was not an incumbent in the election that year. Okay, so typically speaking, incumbents have an advantage because they're already familiar with the office, people are already familiar with them, they know their name, and so when you have people who are not knowledgeable or not sure about the election, they go in to vote, they say, do I choose this person or this person? They're typically going to vote for the person they know more about. Okay, this is especially true, maybe not for the presidential election, but especially true for like local elections or state elections. If they have seen the name or heard the name, they are more likely to vote for that person, even if they don't know anything about them. So incumbents, generally speaking, have an advantage because more people have heard of them and are likely to vote for someone they've heard of versus someone they've never heard of before. Okay, so in the Bush versus Kerry election, George Bush won. Okay, now, that being said, That does not always happen. We saw this in the 2020 election when Donald Trump was the incumbent running for office again, but he lost to Joe Biden, right? Now, also we know that Joe Biden had been vice president before. He'd been in Congress for a very long time before that. And so people are still familiar with his name. So we saw that he was not the incumbent, but people are still familiar with his name. And so he had kind of an advantage as well. All right, our next step, we did primaries and caucuses, now the convention. At this point, each party has narrowed down their candidate to one person. They have a whole list of candidates. Now, every state's voting. So in North Carolina's primary, Donald Trump could have won the Republican primary election. But in Texas, Ted Cruz could have won the presidential election or the primary election, right? So all 50 states are voting. So a candidate, you might not get the same narrowed down to one person in every state, but eventually you'll see Johnny Appleseed, he hasn't won a single state yet, and Johnny Appleseed's going to be like, I'm going to step back from running for president, and he resigned from running for office because he sees he doesn't really have a chance. So as the primary season goes on, remember it starts in February, it's going to run into early summer, but as it gets closer into the spring and summer, candidates see whether they're going to have a chance or not, and you start to see people dropping out of the election, and you see it narrowing down to one or two front runners. Now, at the national convention, which is happening late summer, this is when the political party is going to have a huge rally, a huge party. You can see pictures here of all these people that usually last several days, where they officially announce who is running from their party. So the Republicans say, Donald J. Trump is running for office, and they celebrate him and his vice presidential nominee and all that running for office. Or they say Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or whoever, Joe Biden is officially our choice for president. Okay, and then they have a big party. They have speeches from other notable people within that party. They have concerts from people who've endorsed them. It's a whole shindig where they get together and they party for several days to rally with their candidate. They talk about their platform, what each candidate believes, whether they're going to be, or what each party is going to believe, like what their focus for the upcoming year is going to be in the upcoming campaign season. Are they going to try to push through any different legislation or new policy initiatives, that kind of stuff. And they rally together as a party for what they believe and who they're going to support. It's kind of like a pep rally for the party that lasts several days. At the convention, that's when we see a Democrat versus a Republican officially starting to run against each other. They're, in the beginning, you see a whole bunch of Republicans running against each other to compete to be the Republican that runs for office. And you see a whole bunch of Democrats running for office to be the Democrat. And then the general election is when we shift gears. And that's when we have the Democrat running against the Republican. Okay, the general election, as I said earlier, was the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, and this is when you choose between the parties for offices. So on election day, you get your ballot and you choose, I want to vote for the Democrat candidate or I want to vote for the Republican candidate. Okay? Now remember, on the general election day, you're not just voting for president. Okay? You could be voting for people in the Senate, the House of Representatives, the state governor, North Carolina General Assembly members, your local government, school board, mayor, city council, sheriff. Okay, there's a whole bunch of offices that you have to get, or you have the opportunity to vote for. We've been focusing on mainly just the president's steps because that's probably it gets the most attention. But remember that each of these are going to go through similar processes with primary elections, and a convention where they announce that person as the nominee from the party to run for office. And then on election day, our general election, you'll see all of these different offices where you get to choose. Okay, but as we said at the beginning, for president, he is not chosen by the citizens in November. that helps the states indicate to the delegates of the Electoral College who to vote for in January. So in January, thanks to the 20th Amendment, the delegates for the Electoral College from each state go and they cast ballots to vote for the president. Okay, and we know that each state has the number of electoral votes as they have in Congress. So 2 senators plus how many ever representatives they have. And then we know that D.C., thanks to the 23rd Amendment, also gets 3 votes for the Electoral College. And whichever candidate gets 270 votes is the candidate that will win the election. So this is looking at the 2016 Electoral College Map. And we can see that some states went red for the Republicans, some states went blue for the Democrat, and ultimately the Republican, Donald Trump, won in this election against Hillary Clinton. So every 4 years, we'll see the Electoral College voting, and you'll see maps like this on the news where they say, oh, North Carolina is going red, or North Carolina is going blue, Texas is going red. And that will help determine who wins the presidency. All right, so all along, candidates are going to be paying attention to public opinion and polls. There are Gallup polls that are taken every single day to inform the politicians and their campaign staff and the people of who's being favored by which state or which area. And this helps the politicians monitor the Electoral College to determine where they need to campaign. So if you see that, North Carolina in this recent poll is leaning towards Clinton in this case, then you are Donald Trump's campaign staff, you're going to be like, look, Donald Trump, we need to go to North Carolina and campaign quite a bit so that we can start getting North Carolina's 15 votes. Candidates are traditionally going to go to the swing states. A swing state is a state that sometimes goes blue or sometimes goes red. It just depends on the year. So like North Carolina voted for Barack Obama in that election. Okay? And so we can see here that Donald Trump won it in the next election. So North Carolina was a swing state. It goes from one state to the other state, or one candidate, one party to the other party. We do not always vote Republican. North Carolina does not always vote Democrat. We have a close margin of Democrats and Republicans, and therefore it is a tight race. Somewhere like California almost always votes Democrats. They have a much more liberal population, and they're pretty much a solid vote for the Democrats in every election. Okay, Texas, very strongly Republican, almost always a Republican vote, okay, for the Electoral College. But there are some states, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, for example, that it just depends on the year. It could go either way. And we'll see candidates paying very close attention to the polls and seeing where they're at. If they're in the lead, they might not go there as often, okay, or they might try to keep up their lead, or they'll pay for commercials in that state, or radio ads, or put up signs, or have rallies. Why do candidates always come to North Carolina? That's because North Carolina is a swing state. They're not going to somewhere like North Dakota where there aren't as many people. If we look at the map here, North Dakota gets 3 votes, doesn't usually go Democrat. Okay, so they're not going to spend as much time in North Dakota as they might in North Carolina, which has 15 electoral votes as of 2021. Okay? And remember, the Electoral College changes every 10 years, the number of votes, because of the census. Census counts the population. If one state has added a whole lot of people and another state has lost a lot of people, then they're going to shift the makeup of Congress, and maybe North Carolina would get 16 votes instead of 15, because we would have 14 people in the House of Representatives instead of 13. Okay, maybe let's say Idaho loses some people, so they might lose a person in Congress. So they're down to 2 people in Congress plus 2 senators, or right now. So maybe they lose, and it would say 1 person in the House, 2 people in the Senate, and they'd get 3 electoral votes. So it just shifts over time, which is why we have a census taken every 10 years to count the population. Where do most of the people live in? Do we need to readjust how many votes each state gets? That kind of thing. Right? So you just have to look. Politicians are looking to see which states have the highest number of votes, and that there is a close race, and they're going to campaign in those close races. They campaign by holding rallies where they, gather a whole lot of people, and they give speeches, and people have signs, this whole thing. Debates, we're going to start to see that. You see debates for the primary election. Maybe all the Republican people who are running for office or all the Democrats running for office get on stage and they debate their ideas so that the people can determine, oh, I like this candidate's ideas more. Oh, this guy seems real presidential. Or, ooh, she is giving him a run for his money. She would be great in the White House. So candidates will debate so that the people can see how well they do. And they start to favor one person over the other. They debate in the primaries. They debate in the general election. So that would be like Trump versus Biden, okay, in 2020 had debates so that the voters could say which one was doing better and which one could win their vote. Okay, they also make random appearances like at Five Guys or the ice cream shop or, a mom and pop store for photo ops because it gives them photo cred. And people are like, oh, I met this candidate. And they tell their friends and people look into them and they get to know that candidate more. And then, of course, propaganda. Their campaign staff from their best friends all the way down to people who don't know who just signed up to campaign for them are going to put out signs, put up bumper stickers, hand out T-shirts, and just share propaganda on social media, share ads. Campaigning takes the form of a lot of things. It's also very expensive, and we're going to talk about campaign finance in a different video. So you, as a citizen, can canvass, which is walking door to door or going somewhere, a public space, and talking or promoting your party or your candidate. You can call constituents. Remember, constituents are the people that are voting for you, the people you represent. Sell signs, stickers, shirts, buy TV ads. There's all kinds of ways of campaigning. And it starts from the day you declare that you're running for office, and it goes all the way until the general election, which could be over a year, okay? People are campaigning earlier and earlier and spending more and more money through the election process. We know that the primaries don't start till February, and people are campaigning way before February to try to win their party's nomination.